So let's look into what other info is coming into the dynamic input. So in the drafting settings tab under this dynamic input, you can see what all is getting captured. In this dynamic input, we have the pointer input enabling, and then dimension input enable, and also we have dynamic prompts that are listed. So in this pointer input is where once you have entered the first point, and then it will prompt for the second input and so on. So let's look into this. In this setting, you can see by default it is referring to the polar format as well as in the relative coordinate system. So when typing, we can change to the next value. So polar coordinate, as you could recollect from the week 1 session, when you are specifying a less than angle, it is selecting this. So by pressing on the comma, you can change from the polar to the Cartesian format. So when we are pressing on to the angle system, when from the Cartesian format, it will switch back to the polar. So let us do this once. So let us draw a line, and you could remember the polar system is in place. So that's why you are getting the next point as polar, but rather you can specify by entering the next point. So let us go to the Cartesian coordinates. So by prompting the first x point as 50, then specifying the comma, now the mode is been changed to Cartesian format from polar. So now let us give the next point as 34. So now we'll come back out of the line command, go into the settings tab to see what it has been reflected. So even though the default is here, on the dynamic input screen, we are moving over to the default setting by forcing it using comma or angle symbol. So the same happens when we can switch over from the relative coordinates to the absolute and vice versa. So relative coordinates is being used with the @ symbol, and if you want to revert back to the absolute coordinate, you can enter by the pound sign. So this is how you interchange from one dynamic input setting to the other when drafting. So this is the visibility of the tooltips that are going to display. So by default, whenever a command asks for a point, this tooltip is going to execute. So this is about the pointer input setting. So next is the dimension input settings. So where you can see what are the dimension input fields it has to look into. So the maximum it can show is up to 2 dimension input and is by default. For example, if you want to input multiple dimension fields, then you can select this command and execute. So it will show what is the output dimension of that point that you are going to specify, and what is the length change it is going to change when you move the cursor, and what is the absolute angle, what is the delta angle change, and what is the arc radius. So based on this, you can input the dynamic dimensions. So this is about the dimension input settings. So next is the dynamic prompts. So whenever we have any queries or doubts, so this first input from the command will be displayed in this thing. So we also have the drafting tooltip input. So whether what should be the size of the input box and what should be the transparency. So we can control this based on this drafting tooltip appearance. So this is about the dynamic inputs. So next, let's look into the overall option segment. So in each and every command tab here, you can see there's an option command. So when you click on this, you will get the options command. So this is the application menu option, and it pertains specifically, let us look only into the drafting command as of now, because others you have the file control menu, how the display should be, what is the resolution of it, and how and where it is saved, what is the format of saving, and what is the format of export, all these things. But currently let us focus only on this drafting setting. So here, what is the auto snap setting that it should look at? Should it be displaying to the marker, and should it automatically snap to the point, that is move the cursor to the snap location that it has found, and whether there should be an auto snap tooltip that is enabled, and whether there's an aperture box that is shown. So, and also you can vary the colors what you have to suit. So by default the color is green, but you can customize it as per your requirement. And then what is the auto snap marker size? Should it be this way or should it be enlarged, so you can have a control over this? And what is the aperture size or the crosshair that you can say? So what is the size of that, and what is the tracking settings? So based on this, you can customize the view that you have. And in the drafting tool settings that we had seen previously, you can control the transparency and the size of it. So now we had invoked this options command from the settings command. So now let us look into how we can invoke this command using the command prompt. So by clicking in OP, you can get the options. So alternatively, you can also go to tools and then click on options to get your options command. So this is the way of accessing the options command. So now, having looked into the object snap commands, so let us quickly look into a short tooltip that can help you to accelerate your snap commands. Assuming you're drawing a line and you want to draw another line that is perpendicular to it. So as you can remember, in the object snap command, we had enabled almost all the options. So it is snapping to multiple points. So supposing you want to snap to the perpendicular point here, so how can we do this? So when it's prompting for the next command, it's called a transparent command. You can type in the expected one. So if you prompt it for perpendicular, you type in the first three letters perpendicular. So it will enable that perpendicular snap so that you can snap to that particular point. So this is alternate to what we had spoken earlier, that is through pressing Ctrl and right click and to select whichever we want, but rather we are using the dynamic input setting. So we are specifying the requirement from here. So it always prompts when you are clicking onto the next point. So now this point is getting snapped perpendicular to this. So this is the a dynamic input object snap functionality that AutoCAD offers you. So now let's look into the other lay of the land commands, that is to understand AutoCAD more, to look into the methodologies where you can control your drawing is what is limits and units. So in limits, you specify the hard boundaries of your model space. So the model space is where you're working on. So sometimes if you don't specify the limits, it will go outside the boundary areas and it will be difficult for you to bring that into your drawing space. So when we are looking into the layout space and model space, we'll look in more detail in it, but just let us now enable the limit controls by typing in limits. So now by default, let us turn the limit on first. So let us type in on. So now the limits have been turned on. Now let us specify the limits again by clicking in limits and specifying the lower left corner as say 0, 0 and upper right corner say let us restrict to 100 units. 100 units in the X and 100 units in the Y axis. So now let's try and draw a circle with a center point of say 150, 150. So now the circle is not getting executed and is still waiting for the center point. Why? Because as you could see here, as we had specified the limits to be 100 and 100, the specified limit says that it is going to be outside the limits of the model space. So by this you can restrict the command that you are going to work on. So this is a very mandate, and I would recommend you to set your model space limit first and then work on your drawing. So this is about the limits command. So you can also view the limits in the format setting and then drawing limits. So this is the way of limiting the model space. Next, let's look in the units. So we have been speaking about a lot on the units, because earlier whatever we are speaking in the dimensions, we always speak about certain units in the X direction and certain units in the Y direction. So what are both those units? We were speaking in architectural terms, it might extend to kilometers, and in engineering terms, it might be very precise, say in microns. So how do you limit that? So you use the units command to specify the drawing unit limitations. So here you get two types of units, one for the length and one for the angle. So you can specify what is the type that you're going to use. So the variants what you have is architectural, decimal, engineering, fractional and scientific. You can explore each and one of it and pressing by respective one. So if you change to the architectural unit, you get it by inch and foot. And in decimal, this is the default, you will get the units in decimals. And in engineering, where it is in inches but still the resolution is higher, so you can specify the precision accordingly. And in fractional, when it goes to fractions of those units, so then this will help you out. And finally we have scientific, where it's either astronomically a huge number or a very small number. This you can use to specify the scientific precision. So based on the type that you have selected, the precision also varies. So you can select it whichever suitable to it. And then again specifying the angles, whether it's in decimal degrees or in gradients, radians, survivor units. So you can select whichever is appropriate to it. And also when discussing on the angles, earlier we had mentioned that it is always anti-clockwise. If you want to override it by selecting on this, so the direction will get updated. That is always, it will look into the clockwise direction. The positive will be always in a clockwise direction. So let us roll back to the basic default settings, and this is the variation that you can look into, whether it's meters or kilometers, and hence whenever you start your drawing, always make sure that you have enabled your limits. For example, if you are working in a paper of A2 size, specify those limits. So basically you'll be working within mm of stream, so specify those limits. And secondly, specify your units that you work on. Specify it as inches or millimeters, so that you are keeping track of those units, and this is going to get captured in your final drawing also. So this is the unit command. So now this pretty sums up the basics what we have looking at the lay of the land. How about you navigating the tools available in AutoCAD to suit to your requirements? Next, let's look into two frequently used commands for navigating through the commands, that is the undo and redo. If you could recollect, we were using oops command to undo any mistaken erasing option. So let us redo that. Let us use the erase command to delete this object, and we were using oops to revert back the erase command. Alternatively, we can also use the U command to undo it, and redo command to redo it. So this redo should immediately follow the undo command. We were talking earlier that oops and undo are, even though they are doing the same task, it is slightly different. So oops always restores the object that has been deleted earlier, but undo do all the actions that were done earlier. So this is what we were seeing about. This icon undo in the quick access toolbar can also do multiple actions. So it can roll over to so many actions and the commands that were executed on. So you can see whatever commands have been undone. So the number of commands that were undo were the oops, then the erase command, units command, group command, then limits command, everything has been undone. So the same way you can redo in whatever commands you want. So whatever we have undo, we can redo. So we had undone 18 commands. So now we can redo back this 19 commands. So this is the facility for undo. And earlier, when you use the command of U only, it will immediately undo a single task. When you type in undo, it will ask you how many commands you can undo. That is the command way of doing what you had done earlier in pictorial. So let us undo 15 operations. So likewise, if you want to do multiple redo, you type in mredo and let us roll back these 15 commands. So this is how you work around with the undo and redo commands to do your thing. The only thing you have to note is undo and redo does not do system level activities, system level operations. That is for if you are given a print command or save the file. So those things cannot be done. It will always do on operations that you have performed. So now let's start looking into the editing fundamental commands that we were speaking about, and first with the move command. So we'll start off with a rectangle first and plot it something like this, and then take out a circle. So now what we want to do is, I have misplaced the rectangle in this position. I wanted this rectangle within the circle. So in this case, you need not delete it and then move. Assuming that these two are of the correct dimension, but only the location had been changed, then you can use the move command to affect that. So in order to do that, you can type in move and it prompts for this object selection. So we want here to move this rectangle from here into this circle. So this object that is required will be the rectangle. So once you have clicked in here, and it will prompt for other objects also. So you can terminate it by pressing enter or space, and now it will ask for the reference point from which the object has to be moved. So we can, based on the different endpoints that are available to us, we can select it. So assuming that this endpoint with reference to this, I have selected it, and then I'm moving across and clamping to this nodal point. So by this we have moved this object. So this is the function of the move command. Let us explore what else it can do. Let us undo by pressing Ctrl Z, or rather U command. So now we have undone the move command. Let us replicate it again by moving. I select this object again, press enter, and instead of this I want to specify this as the base point. So this object with reference to this base has been selected, and then you can, instead of specifying the other nodal point or a trimming point, you can also specify the distance that you can do. So you can specify as either a polar coordinate or a relative coordinate system. So consider at a distance of 8 with an angle of 140. So this is how it's getting positioned. So this is the move command by using the relative distance as input. So this sums up the move editing command. Now let's see the copy command. So in copy, what we are doing is we are duplicating the entry of a previous existing object instance. So let us type in the command. So it is copy CO, and assuming we want to duplicate this object, selecting and clicking on enter, and the base point from which it has to be displayed. So selecting this corner as base point and then pressing it here. So as in line and other commands, the copying won't stop until we manually come out of the command through exit or enter. So this is the way of copying. So in copying, what we do is we are not deleting the original object, we are creating instances of the other images by specifying the start point and locating it elsewhere. So this is the function of copy. So alternatively, whatever we have spoken about the earlier move and the copy commands are all available in this modify tab and also in this modify menu. So an extension to this copy command is the array command. So you can very well look into the copy command itself. Once you select the object and selecting the displacement point, it will ask for the final endpoint or specify as an array. When you do it in such a way, when you specify A, now it looks into the number of items it should replicate to. So let us give as 5, and so the same copy command but in an array sequence it is executing. So this is one way of replicating the array mode into copy command so that it is executed. But let us roll back and look into the dedicated array command when you want to do such things. So in order to do that, let us remove temporarily the images and try and recreate a smaller rectangle file. So now let us look into the array command directly. So by typing AR, you can prompt the array. So you select the object, press on enter, and you have an interactive menu asking which type of array do you want to do. It's a rectangular array or a path based array or polar. Let us look into each and every one of them in the graphical user interface first. So let us select this rectangular path. So once you have clicked in, you can see that you will get an additional ribbon tab over here specifying the inputs that is required. So what you do have here is, this is a rectangular type of array with the column details, row details, and the levels between different layers. So, and then also there is a property tabler with which you can edit the array command totally. So if you want to have 6 columns with 4 rows each, you can see it is being replicated onto the screen. And what is the spacing between the columns? Say if you want to space it evenly as 8 units and the distance between the row as 3 units, you can update it the same way. So likewise, the overall distance is being computed, the total distance between the first and the last. So alternatively, by editing on this, you can control the positioning also. So suppose if we specify a unit here, the spacing is adjusted without adjusting the number of elements. So likewise, in the columns, you can replicate the spacing. So if you want to constrain the arrays within a given boundary, you can go for this. Or if you want a specific dimension that needs to be put in, then you can use this. This levels also denote if you are working on different layers, or then you can use this command. Then comes the associative property, wherein the object is an associated array from the base. You can use this. And suppose if you want to override the base point, then you can also denote this. So let us look into resetting of the base point. So if you click on this, so now it will prompt us if you want to shift the base point to a different location. So suppose if you are moving the base point to here, and hence your objects remain same, but the referencing starts from this point. So when you change the spacing involved relative to that base point, it will get adopted. So this is the specification of base point. So suppose if you want to array this object with reference to a different object, you can choose to change the base point reference. So let us revert back to the original base point, and this is how you are getting the array screen. So let us revert back and recreate the array and look into the command prompt of doing this. So instead of selecting on the GUI, let us type in R to select the rectangular array. Alternatively, you can also type in AR RAY RECT array rectangular to directly prompt for the rectangular array object. Okay, let us revert back a little bit. Yeah, type in now array rect to directly opt for the rectangular array, and now you get the rectangular array option. So now whatever options you have seen on the top in the interactive menu, you can get the same here. So you can select whether it's going to be an associative or not. So if you click on AS, it will ask for a prompt to turn it on or off. By default it's on. So if you want to turn it off, you can do so, and specify the base point by setting in B. And so you can alternatively say at which key point it should be located, so that based on this the base point has been modified. and now again the number of count of the columns and rows can control by count operation. So first operation is for the columns. Suppose if we want to have 5 columns and rows as 6, you can specify so, and then the spacing between each and every column through yes, specifying for the column first and then the rows. So every time you do this, you will get back to the base array rectangular command, so that you can keep on looping it out until you are settled with the overall output. You can also get this expression way wherein you can specify the overall distance. So this is by saying that the total rows is 15, whereas the space between is 5, and incremental elevation between each and every element say 2. So you are positioning between these rows in this manner. So you can use the total or expression command to do additional operations that you intend to do. And next, if you want to come out of it, you can click on enter, because by default exit command is already filled into the tool. So by clicking on enter, you can come out of this screen. So this, what we are seeing is the second way of doing it through the command prompt. So we have reverted it back. Now let us look into the other way of doing it. Array, clicking on this object and clicking on just enter, specifying rectangular. Now by default it has been plotted, and now we can use the grips to edit it. You have a starting point, end point, and then number of column command and number of rows command. So by hovering over here, you can see the specification. So by this you can graphically do all the operations that you are doing by selecting the ribbon or through commands. Let's now try and increase the number of columns. So hovering over this arrow shows that the number of columns is 4. So you can click on this and then drag along the axis to specify the number of columns. And similarly to the number of rows, we can edit it graphically to modify it. So next we have internal editing to specify the distance. So here the distance between the first with respect to the base point is 5.24. So by clicking on this and editing, so now each and every object will be equispaced based on the values, and the same for the rows. So this is the way of editing the array dynamically onto the screen. So next we have the grip of this edge to continuously change the number of rows and columns together. So based on the position of it, you can either have a equi-element row or column, or separately the rows or column. So this is the rectangular array methodology where you can replicate it. So this is very much useful when you have equi-spaced elements and they are larger in number, so that the copy command won't work that much. Then you can use the array command to execute it. So now let us go to the next part of the array, which is called as a polar array. So in polar, what we're going to do is we are going to position the object in a base to a fixed center point and then revolve them. As you could see here, this is the reference object and we had picked the center point as here, and the other objects have been positioned along this center point. So here I have zoomed out using the mouse scroll option. So here you can see this object is same, whereas the other objects are equispaced and also they have been rotated. If we click on this icon and remove the rotation and direction, you can see it is the object is retained the same, but the direction is also retained. If you click on rotate is where you will get the object rotated based on the angle of the position. So now this is called the polar array. So here again you can specify the number of objects and the angle by selecting this grip. So here we can specify the angle between the items, but you can notify here, even if we increase the angle, given the shape of the item, it is getting restricted. So now the angle between these two is 47 degrees. If you want to fill in more items, you can type in here to position it, maintaining the distance between them. So here you can see the fill command is used to specify the first and the last angle item. So based on this, the items are filled and their angle is getting adjusted. So assuming this angle to be 275, so the same number of items will get EQ spaced. If you can recollect the previous one, we have specified the total distance between the first and the last column. So likewise, in the polar array, you can specify the overall distance and fill the angle between them. So this is the way of doing polar arrays. So then again we have the associative behavior as we discussed earlier, and then relocating the base point, and then rotation in whichever format we want. So the same can be effected in the graphical way and also in the command prompt way. So this sums up about the, and also you have the number of rows. So it means that you can replicate in the outer or in the inner direction. So based on the requirement. So we have specified the number of rows, and then you can specify the distance with which it will get EQ spaced. And so do wait for some time, maybe with the computer capability it will get a little bit time to get it rendered properly. So wait and then look into this.